Martin Green lived a quiet life with his Labrador, Luna, in a picturesque suburban neighborhood lined with maple trees and neatly trimmed lawns. Martin, a retired schoolteacher in his late 50s, cherished the peaceful rhythm of his days. His modest single-story home sat at the corner of the street, where the sound of children playing and the occasional hum of passing cars broke the tranquility. Yet his true solace came from Luna, his loyal companion and a dog with a story that tugged at the heartstrings of everyone who heard it. Luna wasn't just a pet, she was a survivor. Found abandoned as a puppy, she had endured years of neglect before being rescued and taken to an overcrowded animal shelter. The shelter's chaotic environment, filled with the desperate barks of countless dogs and the heavy weight of uncertainty, left its mark on her. By the time Martin adopted her, Luna bore the scars of her past, not physical ones, but those etched deep into her soul. She was timid, her dark eyes often darting nervously at sudden movements, and she distrusted strangers. But with Martin, she found a sanctuary, and slowly she began to heal. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, built on patience, love, and the unspoken understanding that they had both faced loneliness in their own ways. Despite her progress, some habits from her past lingered. Every Monday morning, without fail, Luna transformed from a quiet, docile companion into a barking whirlwind the moment she heard the distinct rumble of the garbage truck approaching. The sound of grinding metal and clanking bins seemed to awaken a primal instinct in her. She would rush to the window, her paws pressing against the sill, as she barked furiously, her tail stiff and ears pinned back. On the other side of the window, Tony, the garbage collector, approached with visible unease. Tony was a wiry man in his mid-30s, his face weathered from years of working under the sun and in all kinds of weather. Though he was diligent in his job, he harbored a deep-seated fear of dogs, a fear rooted in an incident from his childhood when a neighbor's Rottweiler had chased him down the street. The sight of Luna's sharp barking and intense gaze was enough to make him keep a wide berth from Martin's property. He would hurriedly empty the bins, glancing nervously toward the house to ensure Luna remained behind the glass. Martin had noticed this dynamic and often felt a pang of sympathy for both Luna and Tony. He understood Luna's behavior wasn't aggression, but anxiety, a reaction born of her difficult past. He also recognized Tony's discomfort and admired the man for continuing his work despite his visible apprehension. On a few occasions, Martin had tried to reassure Tony, calling out through the door that Luna was harmless and simply noisy, but the distance between them, both physical and emotional, remained. To Martin, this weekly exchange was a poignant reminder of how past experiences could shape behavior in both humans and animals. Luna's barking was her way of asserting control in a world that had once made her feel powerless. For Tony, his cautious demeanor reflected the lingering shadows of a traumatic memory. Both carried invisible wounds, and while they couldn't communicate directly, their interactions mirrored the complexities of healing and trust. In time, Martin wondered if there might be a way to bridge the gap. Perhaps one day, Luna and Tony could meet on neutral ground, free of barriers and fear. For now, though, their shared Mondays remained a delicate dance. Luna barking with all her might, and Tony working with quiet determination, both navigating the echoes of their pasts in the calm of Martin's suburban street. Tony had carried a deep-seated fear of dogs ever since a childhood encounter left him with a scar, not just a faint mark on his leg, but a lasting imprint on his psyche. It happened when he was 8 years old, playing outside with a ball that had rolled into a neighbor's yard. He had barely set foot on the lawn when their German shepherd lunged at him, knocking him to the ground and leaving him with a bite that required several stitches. Although the physical wound healed quickly, the memory of the dog's snarling face, the searing pain in his leg, and the helplessness he felt as he screamed for help stayed with him. From that moment on, Tony grew wary of dogs. He would cross the street to avoid them and felt a tight knot in his stomach whenever he heard a bark nearby. Yet life had an ironic way of confronting his fears. As a garbage collector, Tony found himself face to face with dogs more often than he cared to. Behind fences, barking at windows, or straining against leashes held by their owners, dogs were an unavoidable part of his daily routine. Over time, he developed a method of dealing with them: maintain a safe distance, avoid sudden movements, and never make direct eye contact. Most dogs were content to bark or watch him warily, but he could always feel their presence, their energy buzzing like static in the air. But Luna was different. From the very first time Tony had stopped in front of Martin Green's house, the Labrador had made her feelings known. As soon as she heard the garbage truck approaching, she would leap to the window, her barking sharp and relentless, her body tense with what Tony could only interpret as aggression. It unnerved him, though he noticed she never tried to get outside. She stayed behind the glass, her eyes fixed on him as though she were trying to figure him out. Tony couldn't help but wonder what it was about him that seemed to provoke Luna. Maybe she could sense his fear, or perhaps it was simply the noise and motion of his job that set her off. He wasn't sure, and he didn't want to find out. Each week, he approached Martin's house with extra caution, moving quickly to empty the bins and return them to their place at the curb. He avoided looking at Luna, yet he could feel her gaze on him, an intensity that lingered even after he drove away. And then, one Monday morning, something happened that Tony could never have anticipated. He was going about his usual routine, hauling the trash bins to the truck while Luna barked as expected. But as he turned to bring the bin back, he felt something light brush against his leg. His heart stopped. A wave of panic surged through him, cold and sharp. For a split second, his mind conjured the worst scenarios Luna had escaped, and he was about to relive the terror of his childhood. He froze in place, too afraid to look down. Finally, summoning the courage, he turned slowly. What he saw left him stunned. Luna was sitting a few feet behind him, her posture calm and unthreatening. Her tail swayed gently, brushing the ground, and her dark, curious eyes were locked on his. She wasn't barking or growling. In fact, she looked almost serene, as though she had been watching him for some time and had decided to make her approach. For a moment, Tony stood completely still, unsure of what to do. His instincts told him to back away, to put as much distance between himself and the dog as possible. But something in Luna's gaze stopped him. There was no hostility in her expression, only curiosity, maybe even a hint of vulnerability. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to make sense of him, and Tony felt an unexpected flicker of recognition. This wasn't the fierce, barking dog he had always imagined. Up close, Luna seemed smaller, softer, and somehow less intimidating. Tony's heart was still pounding, but he took a slow, shaky breath and forced himself to stay calm. "Hey there," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Luna's ears perked up at the sound, and her tail wagged a little faster. Encouraged by her reaction, Tony took a cautious step back, giving her space. But Luna didn't move. She just sat there, watching him with those steady, unblinking eyes. The moment stretched out, a fragile truce between man and dog. Tony wasn't sure how long they stood there, but eventually, Luna's tail gave one last wag, and she turned and trotted back toward the house. She paused at the door, glancing back at him one more time before disappearing inside. Tony let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were trembling, but he felt something else, too. A sense of relief, and maybe even a hint of pride. He had faced his fear, however briefly, and he had survived. More than that, he had seen Luna in a new light. She wasn't just the barking dog at the window anymore. She was a living, breathing creature with her own story, her own fears, and perhaps her own courage. As he climbed back into the truck and drove away, Tony couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, like the beginning of something he couldn't quite define. For the first time in years, he wondered if his fear of dogs wasn't as unshakable as he had always believed. Maybe, just maybe, he and Luna had taken the first steps toward understanding each other. And in that quiet suburban street, with the morning sun casting long shadows, it felt like a small victory worth holding on to. Over time, the once tense dynamic between Luna and Tony began to shift in ways neither could have predicted. The barking that had once punctuated Tony's every visit gradually ceased. Instead, Luna would wait quietly on the sidewalk, her tail gently wagging as she observed him from a distance. It was as if she could sense his unease, recognizing his fear, and choosing not to provoke him. Martin, watching from his front window, was the first to notice the change. She's giving him space, he thought, smiling to himself. Luna's transformation spoke volumes about her growing trust and her innate sensitivity, a testament to the healing she'd undergone since Martin had welcomed her into his life. Tony, for his part, couldn't help but notice Luna's newfound calmness. Each week, as he stepped out of the truck and rolled the trash bins to the curb, he would glance toward her. She no longer barked or paced. She simply sat, her gaze steady, but not threatening. At first, Tony dismissed it as a coincidence, wary of getting too comfortable. His fear of dogs, though softened by time, still lingered like a faint shadow. But the more he observed Luna's behavior, the more he felt a quiet reassurance in her presence. There was no aggression, no attempt to cross the invisible boundary he had drawn. It was as if she understood his hesitancy and was patiently waiting for him to take the next step. That step came on a crisp autumn morning, the air filled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. As Tony finished returning the bins to the curb, he glanced over and saw Luna sitting closer than usual, her eyes fixed on him with a gentle curiosity. His heart quickened, but there was no fear this time, only a strange, unfamiliar determination. He hesitated, his hand lingering on the handle of the bin. Then, summoning courage he didn't know he had, Tony turned toward her and took a tentative step forward. Luna remained still, her tail giving a slow, rhythmic wag. Encouraged, Tony crouched down a few feet away from her. "Hey there, girl," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head, her ears perking up at the sound. Taking a deep breath, Tony extended his hand, his palm open and trembling slightly. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, Luna leaned forward and gently sniffed his hand. Her warm breath tickled his skin, and before he could second-guess himself, he reached out and lightly patted her head. The sensation was unlike anything Tony had expected. Luna's fur was soft and warm, her head leaning ever so slightly into his touch. It was the first time in years, decades even, that he had willingly touched a dog, and the moment was both terrifying and exhilarating. Luna looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with something that felt like gratitude, and Tony felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying begin to lift. From that day forward, their encounters took on a new rhythm. Each week, Tony brought a small treat or a toy for Luna. Sometimes it was a simple dog biscuit tucked into his jacket pocket. Other times, it was a squeaky ball or a chew toy he had picked up at the store. Luna, once cautious and reserved, began greeting him with an enthusiastic wag of her tail. She would trot over to meet him, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the treat in his hand. Tony, still cautious but growing more confident, found himself looking forward to these moments. The fear that had once gripped him so tightly now seemed to ebb away, replaced by a quiet joy he hadn't felt in years. For Luna, these brief but meaningful interactions became a source of happiness and healing. She, too, had once carried the weight of fear and mistrust, her past leaving her wary of human kindness. But Tony's gentle approach, his willingness to meet her halfway, rekindled a sense of trust she thought she had lost forever. Martin often watched these exchanges from his porch, his heart swelling with pride at how far both Luna and Tony had come. It was as if they were helping each other heal, their bond growing stronger with each passing week. In the quiet of the suburban mornings, the unlikely friendship between Luna and Tony became a small but beautiful story of redemption. Luna, once broken and fearful, had found her confidence and joy. And Tony, burdened by years of anxiety, discovered that facing his fears had led him to an unexpected and heartwarming connection. Together, they proved that even the smallest acts of courage and kindness could mend wounds and build bridges. Their weekly meetings, though brief, became a highlight for both, a reminder that trust, once lost, could always be found again. Martin Green had always prided himself on understanding Luna. Over the years, he had come to recognize the subtle shifts in her mood, the wag of her tail when she was happy, the way her ears drooped when she felt uncertain, and the excited bounce in her step when it was time for a walk. Yet her recent behavior puzzled him. The transformation was undeniable. Luna, who had once barked relentlessly at the garbage collector, now greeted him with quiet anticipation and a wagging tail. It was as if the fear and distrust that had defined her interactions with strangers had melted away, but only when it came to this one man. Curiosity got the better of him. Martin had a security camera mounted near his front porch, mainly for peace of mind, and he decided to review the footage to see if he could piece together what had caused this remarkable change. What he found stopped him in his tracks. The grainy footage showed Tony crouched near Luna, his hand extended as she gently sniffed it. He watched as Tony reached out to pat her head, his movements careful, almost hesitant, and saw Luna lean into his touch with a quiet trust that Martin knew was hard-earned. In subsequent clips, he noticed Tony bringing small treats or toys, and Luna responding with unbridled joy, her tail wagging so hard it seemed her entire body swayed with it. Martin replayed the scene several times, his chest tightening with emotion. Here was a man who, despite his initial wariness, had taken the time to connect with Luna in a way that few others ever had. It wasn't just heartwarming, it was transformative. Martin realized that these small moments of kindness had not only bridged the gap between them, but had also helped Luna heal in ways he hadn't thought possible. It was clear that Tony's patience and gentleness had reached a part of her that still carried the scars of her difficult past. When the next Monday rolled around, Martin decided to seize the opportunity to express his gratitude. As the garbage truck rumbled down the street, he slipped on his jacket and stepped outside with Luna trotting obediently by his side. When the truck came to a halt in front of his house, Tony climbed out, prepared to go through his usual routine. But instead of finding the bins waiting for him, he was met with Martin's warm smile and an outstretched hand. "Good morning," Martin said, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "I'm Martin, Luna's owner. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to bond with her. It means more to me than you can imagine." Tony, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before shaking Martin's hand. "Oh, it's no problem," he replied, glancing down at Luna, who was sitting quietly beside Martin. Her tail wagged lazily as she looked up at Tony, her eyes filled with the same calm curiosity that had once startled him. Martin crouched down, gently scratching behind Luna's ears. "Luna hasn't always been this way," he began, his tone softening. "She had a rough start in life. I adopted her from a shelter a few years ago. She'd been abandoned as a puppy and spent years in a place where she didn't know kindness. By the time she came home with me, she was timid and mistrustful of everyone. It took a lot of patience to get her to trust me, let alone anyone else." Tony listened intently, his hands resting on the handle of the trash bin. Martin's words painted a vivid picture of Luna's past. The cold, impersonal environment of the shelter, the endless days of uncertainty, and the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. As he spoke, Tony felt an unexpected wave of empathy wash over him. He glanced at Luna, who was now leaning into Martin's touch, and saw not just a dog, but a survivor. Martin paused and looked up at Tony. "But something changed when you started coming by. I noticed it, and I couldn't figure it out at first. Then I saw the security footage of you two, the way you took the time to let her come to you, the treats, the toys. It's incredible. I think you've helped her heal in a way I couldn't." Tony shifted uncomfortably, not used to such heartfelt praise. "I didn't do much," he said quietly. I don't know. She seemed different, like she was giving me a chance, and I figured maybe I should give her one too." Encouraged by Martin's openness, Tony found himself sharing something he rarely spoke about. "The truth is, I've always been scared of dogs. When I was a kid, I got bitten by one big dog in my neighborhood. I was just a little kid, and it felt like it came out of nowhere. Ever since then, I've stayed away from them as much as I could. But Luna, she's different. I don't know how to explain it. She made me want to try." Martin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like you've both had your share of tough experiences," he said. "Maybe that's why you understand each other." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the air between them filled with an unspoken understanding. Luna broke the stillness by nudging Tony's hand with her nose, prompting a quiet chuckle from him. He reached down and scratched behind her ears, marveling at how natural the gesture now felt. From that day on, their interactions became more than just a brief exchange at the curb. Martin would often step outside to chat with Tony, sometimes sharing coffee or discussing the little things that made up their lives. Luna, once wary of strangers, became the bridge that connected them, a testament to the healing power of patience, kindness, and the unexpected bonds that can form when least expected. Two individuals, each marked by their own struggles, found a unique, almost inexplicable bond through a shared connection with Luna. Tony, a man who had spent years retreating from his own insecurities and fears, realized that it was not only Luna's presence that had begun to heal him, but her quiet, unwavering support had also unlocked a deeper part of him. In their time together, he discovered an unexpected clarity, a sense of peace and acceptance he had been long deprived of. Luna had a way of drawing him out of his most private battles, making him confront his past with a newfound courage. Her calm demeanor allowed him the space to be vulnerable without the weight of judgment. And in that space, Tony understood that facing his fears didn't mean avoiding them. It meant confronting them head-on with patience, something he had never allowed himself before. For Luna, this relationship was equally transformative, though in a different way. Having been hurt in the past, her trust had been shattered, leaving her hesitant to open her heart to anyone. She had built walls around herself as a defense, unsure whether anyone would ever respect her boundaries enough to dismantle them. But Tony, with his unspoken compassion and quiet persistence, began to earn that trust, piece by piece. His actions were simple, small, meaningful gestures that showed he was reliable, steadfast in his commitment. Slowly, Luna found herself believing that not all people were bound by the same flaws she had experienced before. She began to recognize that vulnerability wasn't a weakness to be feared, but rather an opportunity for genuine connection. Through this shared journey of healing, both Tony and Luna transformed. What had initially been an interaction born from their mutual need for comfort became a deep, mutual exchange of understanding and emotional growth. Luna had learned to let go of her cautious, guarded nature and embrace the possibility of true trust once again. Tony, too, had learned to cultivate the patience required not only to heal himself, but to help Luna heal in her own time, on her own terms. It was not a dramatic shift, but rather a subtle, consistent change in their hearts and minds. A transformation born out of a simple yet powerful connection, one that had started with the understanding that neither was alone in their struggles. Through Luna, Tony learned that real change comes from within. And through Tony, Luna learned that healing could be a journey worth trusting. Through this shared journey of healing, both Tony and Luna transformed. What had initially been an interaction born from their mutual need for comfort became a deep, mutual exchange of understanding and emotional growth. Luna had learned to let go of her cautious, guarded nature and embrace the possibility of true trust once again. Tony, too, had learned to cultivate the patience required not only to heal himself, but to help Luna heal in her own time, on her own terms. It was not a dramatic shift, but rather a subtle, consistent change in their hearts and minds. A transformation born out of a simple yet powerful connection, one that had started with the understanding that neither was alone in their struggles. Through Luna, Tony learned that real change comes from within. And through Tony, Luna learned that healing could be a journey worth trusting. The connection between Tony and Luna was a powerful reminder that the most unexpected relationships often hold the greatest potential for growth, teaching both of them and everyone who witnessed their journey that sometimes it is the most unlikely friendships that help us rebuild our lives. A message of courage, patience, and the extraordinary healing power of kindness. Tony, Luna, and Martin had unknowingly become symbols of hope for many, showing that healing is not a solitary endeavor. It is, instead, something that thrives in the company of others, especially those who can see us for who we truly are, scars and all. In a world that can often feel disconnected, their story reminded us that love and kindness, no matter how simple, can reach across boundaries and mend even the deepest of wounds.